Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Wednesday edition of All Access AM. I am Billy Embody. Thanks for joining us. We've got a packed show for you guys. Once again, talking ACC football. Week 9 is upon us, and a big one for this league. As always, things heating up in that ACC championship picture. We'll have Wes Durham to preview the Week 9 slate with us at 8:15 a.m. Eastern Time. Really excited to have ACC Network play-by-play man Wes Durham joining us. Saw him at Clemson this weekend, and I said, hey, why don't you come on with us, talk about the slate? He said, absolutely. He'll be at Carolina this weekend as the Who's head over to Chapel Hill to see what all the buzz about Jordan Hudson is about. And then at 8:30, we'll have Stephen Wagner of On3 covering Miami for us to join us, talk about the Canes, where they go from here as they look to reset after that loss to Louisville at home. It's that time of year. Miami loses a key game and is now kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit as far as playing catch up. They host Stanford this weekend. So the Cardinal, coming off that win over Florida State, will head over to Miami and see if they can do what Florida State could not do, and that's travel across the country and get a win. And speaking of that, we'll talk about Mike Norvell. I'll share my thoughts here in the opening here and kind of share what I feel like is A, going on in Tallahassee, B, whether or not they should let go of him. And I'm sure some Florida State Seminole fans are going to come in here potentially and say, you are completely wrong, but this is a new era of college football. And as people navigate it, I'm giving them more leeway, just a bit. So maybe that's right. Maybe that's wrong. We'll find out, though. Mike Norvell will get the rest of the season to show why he is the man at Florida State, or if they end up just making a change and getting rid of him for a mere $100 million to fire him, fire his staff, and bring in a new staff, according to our own Pete Nakos reporting those numbers. So thanks for being with us. Wednesday AM edition. We are live on YouTube. We are also available on podcast, Apple, and Spotify after this episode. We turn and burn it, get it out for you guys. So maybe you could have it for your lunchtime listen. You can have it for your commute home. But thank you guys to all of you who have hit that subscribe button. Please go to our YouTube channel, All Access AM. Hit the subscribe button for us. Hit a like. Watch some other videos. I kind of chop up the show a little bit as best I can to get some of the segments out there to some of our guests. So make sure you check those out. We appreciate all the support, and please leave a rating and a review on the podcast side of things if you listen on that front. So Mike Norvell getting another year, or getting the rest of the year. Don't really want to get people going, but getting the rest of the year to show whether or not he should be the Florida State head coach. And here's a couple of thoughts on this. To get rid of Mike Norvell, it's going to cost you about $54 million in buyout money. Then you have to fire the staff for the most part, assuming they can everybody. And then you have to hire new staff. On3's Pete Nakos reported that's going to be about a $100 million decision for Michael Alford to figure out. They're going to do complete a comprehensive assessment of the program that'll take place at the end of the season. And I don't know what that final decision is going to be. I think it seems like everybody knows that time is dwindling for Mike Norvell. But at the same time, should it really be dwindling? And I'm not talking about should it be dwindling from the standpoint of I think he's doing a good job. I think Florida State football is on on sound footing, and they're in a great spot. They're not right now. They haven't won an ACC football game in over a calendar year. But they did overhaul their program in the offseason. Gus Malzahn comes in, calls plays. They hired new defensive coordinator, Tony White, who I think is a good defensive coordinator. I think things are, for the most part, working out there in Tallahassee. There are some things that they would certainly want to see improved on both sides of the ball. But, opponents scoring 22.6 points per game, not a bad situation to be in. Offensively, 39 points a game. Some of that's juiced up a little bit. That I look at some of the things that, people would say to that and completely agree. You have some of those games like East Texas A&M on the schedule, where they have juiced their own scoring points average. But there's also the reality of you've shown a little bit as to what you can do. You beat Alabama to open the season 31-17. And then the rest of the way you've played decent offensively. The bottom has not fallen out. Of course, Virginia, they were able to put up some points in that one. The defense really didn't do them any favors in that one. Shout out to Tony Elliott and that offensive staff for getting UVA kind of ready to roll. And then Miami, they really faced the Canes playing at such a high level. And that was a game where I think the rebuilding piece of Florida State is not to where Miami is. Miami has invested. Miami has a quarterback who's a winner, despite what happened in the game against Louisville this past weekend. You have so much talent on that defensive front. You have athletes that can pen in Tommy Castellanos and kind of keep him at bay. Only 57 yards rushing in that one for him. He was the leader. Then you have Pitt, which inexplicable kind of way to lose that one. 34-31, Mason Heichel making his first start, I believe. But, Stanford, a tough across the country road trip that a lot of teams have struggled with. Louisville struggled with it last year. BC, I believe they were on the road for that one when they lost, although BC is terrible this year. A lot of teams struggle with that east to west type of a contest. But that is the really inexcusable one for me. And that's where you really got to question, okay, where is Florida State from a strength and conditioning perspective? Where are they from a talent and player evaluation standpoint? Those are the things that I think need to really come under scrutiny here as we move into the back half of this season and see where Florida State wants to go from the standpoint of assessing and addressing its own roster. Because this is a new world of college football. There's the money ball side of it where you're trying not to be too top heavy and not have depth and find the right fits for your team and assess where players can help you. I still think this thing is moving towards an NFL style type of roster management, cap management, all of those things that NFL teams have to deal with, where you don't want to sink money into certain positions and be bogged down. Florida State is figuring that out. And I am still of the belief in college football that wherever you sink your money in at the quarterback position is going to determine a lot about where your team is going. Do I think Tommy Castellanos was the right fit for this offense? Probably. It's a good situation. I mean, he has that familiarity with Gus Malzahn. He has that kind of fit in the offense with the ability to run and pass. So I get it. That marriage is, I don't have a problem with it, but you're also kind of limited because Tommy Castellanos has only been this kind of flash in the pan type of quarterback. He hasn't been consistent enough as a passer, and he hasn't been somebody who can really put a team on his back consistently. And Florida State, with some of their skill position issues, have kind of been that way. Like, I am not of the belief that Florida State having these big receivers and always, touting, okay, these jump ball winners and things like that. That's not something that really impresses me. It is a different world of college football and kind of how you need to build out your receiving core, how you need to build out your tight end rooms, how you need to build out your running game. All of those things are things that, for Alex Atkins, the previous offensive coordinator, the offensive line, that took a major step back. That is a group that still needs to be addressed. I don't agree that Herb Hand was a good pick as the offensive line coach. That is something that I was doing another show last night, and we were talking about Phil Longo, who's the head coach of Sam Houston State. And I don't understand why he was hired for that job. Don't understand it. He's made a living, though, off of being somebody who has managed to keep getting jobs and getting jobs and getting jobs because he once called good offensive plays for a couple of years. Herb Hand has been at some big programs, and so for those reasons, he's been able to keep getting jobs. You need to look at the development of his actual offensive lines through the years. They have got to figure out that position. If they don't, they're going to continue to be where they're at. And that's from a recruiting and that's from a development standpoint. So there's some pieces to the Florida State puzzle that still need to be fixed. For me, I want to watch the rest of the season. I'm with Michael Alford. I want to see the complete, comprehensive assessment be done on Florida State and then go from there. Because if you sink 50, I actually just saw Pete Nakos' article, $58 million into getting rid of Mike Norvell, saying we don't like you. That is something that is such a move that Michael Alford, one, better be sure. Like, are you sure you don't want to go one more year and have some real conversations about what needs to be done versus what you could do, with a new coach and just letting them do it? That's where it's a really tough conversation around Florida State, for me at least. That monetary value to sink into them getting rid of Mike Norvell is just crazy to stomach. I mean, you kind of see the feedback around James Franklin getting rid of by Penn State. That's a different animal. He's won consistently, just hasn't won the big game. Mike Norvell's been able to do some things at Florida State that have been impressive. They got snubbed from the college football playoff. And of course, that kind of sent them into the spiral. But the last 2 years have not been good. I'm intrigued to see what the comprehensive assessment looks like as we head to that end of the line this season, at least for the Seminoles, and how they finish things out, because they really do have quite the jump to make, I think, to save Mike Norvell's job, and of course throwing a bye this week. So look, we're going to have Wes Durham join us in just a second. Do want to remind you guys about our friends at OPW Solutions. OPW Solutions would love for you guys to reach out to them, and they can show you the work that they can do for your business. They're a full-service commercial exterior maintenance company. They service North Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and they're expanding to new locations in 2026. They can do your commercial landscaping, power washing, snow and ice control. They also can paint your parking lot or put up Christmas lights for your business, fence maintenance, and much more. So make sure you give them a call, 214-444 2305. Sorry. Didn't want to give you the wrong number. 214-444-2305, or email them info@opwsolutions.com, or go to opwsolutions.com. Again, full service maintenance company there for your business, doing great work. And you can follow them on their socials as well to make sure that you get the full story from them on how they approach every single piece of their business and your business and servicing that. So we appreciate OPW Solutions for helping us out. Really excited now about our next guest. Ran into him at Clemson this weekend, and it is Wes Durham of the ACC Network joining us now. Wes, thanks so much for the time. How are you this weekend? How's the travel treating you?
Well, the hard lifting is over. Clemson to San Francisco and back within 9 to 12 hours is not exactly what we all call for, Billy. But, I've recovered, and now it's, let's see, what day? Tuesday. No, Wednesday. So I'm good. Yeah. There we go. I got my days straight, so we're ready for this week. How's that?
Well, at least you're not going to be showing up somewhere a day early or a day late.
Yeah.
We've got that down now, so we're here to help in that regard. But you'll be on the call this weekend, Virginia at North Carolina, 11 a.m. on ACC Network, of course. So everybody tune in. That's 11 a.m. Central, Eastern Time, noon for those of you. UVA favored by 10.5 here. This is a game that, of course, is going to be another inflection point potentially for Bill Belichick in his program. But let's talk about the Hoos. They've been doing such a great job this year, coming away with some hard-fought wins. Games like Louisville, of course, Washington State come to mind. Yeah. This Tony Elliott bunch is just not going away, though.
No, they're not, and they've got the benefit of a schedule that works for them too, right? Because the Duke game sits out there like a beacon ahead. Even though the Blue Devils lost to Georgia Tech last week, Billy, I still think that Virginia and Duke are going to have some degree of stake in this in terms of possible representation. It is interesting the way this has worked for Tony Elliott. There was a lot of chatter in the offseason about Virginia had more resources. You want to lead that to be money, that's fine with me. Virginia had a ton more resources. They certainly had some patience in Tony's work there. We all know about the horrific tragedy they had a couple of years ago. And it finally felt like, in all honesty, that Tony Elliott had some footing as Virginia's football coach. And sure enough, Chandler Morris has become this thing, right? And as you guys know from Chad being in the Dallas Metroplex, and certainly Chandler being around college football for as many places as he's been, and certainly at North Texas last year in the Denton area. The guy can play, but it's not just Chandler Morris. It's a big part, but they've also been very intentional with things they've done in the portal. The two backs, Harrison Whaley, who came from Wyoming, who was the active Division I rushing leader coming into the season, and still may be career rushing leader. And then Jamari Taylor, who came from North Carolina Central, to go along with this. Don't ask me how this happened, but Daniel Rickard is a 235-pound defensive end who makes plays behind the line, tackles for losses and sacks, and he had a huge play the other night against Washington State. So it just feels like the transfer portal has really worked for them. And then they brought back some other guys who had contributed in years past, and they're pretty sturdy in the offensive line. The left side in particular is homegrown. The right side's got a little more transfer portal flavor to it. But, yeah, I'm excited to kind of see what Virginia is. We had them against Stanford early in the package this fall. They were really impressive that night at home in Charlottesville. And now we get a game, Virginia-Carolina, for Mustang fans who might be watching. The Virginia-Carolina game's got some history to it. It's called the South's oldest rivalry. Georgia-Auburn is the Deep South's oldest rivalry. So remember the definition and differences there, Billy. But Virginia-Carolina, when the other team has been ranked, the unranked team typically wins. And Mac Brown lost 2 games to Virginia, I think at Tony Elliott's first 2 years as head coach, where he was the ranked team. And now can Carolina, who played better last Friday night at Cal, can Carolina pull that trick on Saturday at home at Kenan Stadium? We'll see. The Tar Heels will have to play a lot better than they did at Cal, and they can't turn the ball over and have some foolish penalties, but we'll see how it goes. It could be an interesting game. We'll see. It also could be a runaway freight train for the Cavaliers.
Yeah, that was my kind of wonder going into this one is, are you going to see UNC say, look at what we almost did. We almost went across the country. Right. We almost did this. We almost did that. We just let it slip through our fingertips. Let's go show that wasn't completely out of sorts for maybe what UNC could be in the second half of the year. We know it's been a tough sledding for the Tar Heels so far, but this could be that, or this could be, a get right game for Virginia. They're probably not feeling the best coming off of that win.
Well, that's the other thing too. Washington State's kind of become this weird team nationally, not just because they don't have any kind of conference structure. They play Ole Miss to the edge, then they turn around and play Virginia to the edge. I don't know who they got left, but they're in trouble.
Look out.
Yeah, I think that Carolina, in watching the Cal game yesterday, Carolina did some good things. I'm not sure Carolina did enough good things. Offensively, they had a heartbeat, which is more than we could say the previous 6 weeks. Yeah. Defensively, they've not been bad. They've not been great either, but they've not been brutal. Tyler Thompson, a defensive end, had a couple of sacks for him the other night to take the team lead. There you go. I mean, that's
a Bill Belichick defense, right?
Yeah, and that's the part. If you had anything to surprise me with this year, it's that they've not been better defensively. Because historically at the NFL level, and I know it's a different world, but even his scheme and structure has been proven, right?
Right.
And they've just not been very good. The other thing too is, and I know you can appreciate this because of the way you followed SMU. Carolina has the 73 new players, right?
Yeah.
31 of them are in the 2 deep. Yeah. 31, Billy. That's a huge number.
Yeah.
It's just a massive number. So we'll see what happens. I think Carolina needs to, quiet things down and take care of themselves as much as anything else. And that's somebody who's watched Carolina football basically their entire life. But I find it interesting. And I'm really interested to see just what the environment's like. And now, here's the lure of the old Carolina of yesteryear. With basketball starting, what's the interest in football? Oof. So we'll see.
Yeah, winding down there, I saw, of course, Duke in their own exhibition last night. Packed house, so they look the part. UNC hoping to jump back on their level. We'll have a ton of basketball conversation around the league in the near future. Excited about that. But the Wake Forest SMU game.
Sure.
That is an intriguing one.
Mm-hmm.
Typical trap game. Wake Forest play Georgia Tech well. You go back out to the East Coast if you're SMU. Early kick, all the things. You're banged up. Who knows how stable Kevin Jennings' ankle is a week
Sure.
after. SMU just has to find a way, though. That's where they're at. They're at the top of the league in as one of the unbeatens in conference play.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. Number one, the return to the East Coast, but this is the part where I think the brand of the program helps this year's team, because these guys, we had the Stanford game on the West Coast last year where they went out there and obviously took care of business. The second part about where they are from a brand standpoint is I think this coaching staff does a marvelous job in preparation. I mean, we've had, obviously, as you know, we've had the Mustangs 3 times this year. I think it's fascinating to watch them get ready every week and to have these coaching visits. And we had them 2 weeks ago against Syracuse before we had them last week. And I was really appreciative of the way they talked about their preparation and kind of how they get ready. Jennings is a warrior, Billy. I mean, he is. It's amazing to watch, because I think the ankle sprain was in the opening series last week.
Yeah.
And then he was gutting it out. And then you want to talk about stunning me was when we had the quarterback run stuff in the late stages of the first half. I mean, when he was doing the quarterback run stuff in the late stages to get them a score before the half, I thought, holy smokes. I mean, he's putting it on the line. So I think we've seen at least 2 kind of warrior mentalities at quarterback this year in Jennings and Haynes King at Georgia Tech. And I think those 2 guys are starting to surface. Look, you can't take away, despite last Friday night, you can't take away what Beck had done at Miami. But I would say Jennings and King are slowly emerging here to the top of just like heartbeats of their respective teams as this season goes on.
And for Wake Forest, they could end up playing 2 quarterbacks in this one. Deshaun Purdy had success against Oregon State, and of course Robbie Ashford's been a little banged up, but has that running dynamic to him. That's kind of the hard part about, I think, game planning for this too. You just don't know what Jake Dickert and his staff are going to do with a bye week as well.
Yeah, they came out against Georgia Tech off a bye, scheming Georgia Tech straight up. So I would expect, if I'm Scott Simons and Casey and Rhett, they're going to be thinking about scheming in particular to specifics of the formations, right? And that's exactly what they did against Georgia Tech. Bottom line, though, as much as the quarterback is in question, if Damon Claiborne's playing, that's not a question. That guy's a pro. He's a terrific football player, and he has run behind a wide variety of offensive lines in his Wake Forest career. So to me, if Purdy's the quarterback, if Robbie Ashford comes in for a package, given his health, it's still about getting Damon Claiborne on the ground. Wake has been in trouble when they can't run the ball. If they can't run the ball, then I'm not sure the quarterback can beat SMU. And here's the thing. It's good news, I think, for the Mustangs. Now, I may be missing something here in the logic or translation of television, but it feels to me like SMU is starting to finally get some concepts defensively. Now, they did give up 2 balls last week, and Wesco almost caught a third.
Yeah.
But Clemson didn't run the ball across the street against them.
Yeah.
I mean, SMU buttoned it up last week and forced Christopher Vizina to try and beat him, and he couldn't. And for me, that is an incredibly encouraging sign for where the Mustangs may have to go in the second half.
Yeah, they were something else in the pass defense this whole season for the most part, but they have gotten better. They're finding their way in conference play a little bit, and we'll see how they do it. And if it's Robbie Ashford, that kind of plays into it a little bit, for them, having to defend Claiborne. But if you're kind of focused a little bit more on the runner, Robbie Ashford, maybe that helps. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's tough to see them not giving up at least 250 through the air, but this
you've already got a number in your head.
A 250 would not be bad, though.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Remember, in September they gave up 430 yards per game in the air, which crazy. But that was how the cookie crumbled for the Mustangs as they figured things out. They look to stay unbeaten. Georgia Tech looks to stay unbeaten. Mm-hmm. This is an interesting one for me from this perspective. I think from a matchup wise, I know there's a big line on this one. Syracuse can't move the ball, but can they just kind of slow down this Georgia Tech attack? If I'm looking at some of these other Week 9 games, when you look at the ones that are Pitt taking on NC State, that might be an intriguing one, but a closer matchup. And then you've got the big spreads like Miami, Stanford, Louisville, Boston College.
Right.
Syracuse, Georgia Tech, I don't know. I could see that one being just a touch closer after kind of that war between Georgia Tech and Duke.
Yeah, the interesting part about Georgia Tech and Syracuse, and Brent Key talks about nameless, faceless opponents. That's kind of his Nick Saban preaching coming into play. However, there was a lot said post-game last year after Syracuse beat Georgia Tech. There was a lot said by Fran Brown. There were some things said prior to the game by Brent Key that got interpreted to Fran Brown in one way after the game. He made another comment. And I only bring this up because out of nowhere in the offseason, one of the Tech players talked about the Syracuse game. And it just came out of nowhere in a conversation. Look, we had losses last year like Syracuse, things like that. And whenever a specific loss is mentioned, like in May, Billy, or in July, that's when you kind of have that thing, remember, in the back of your head where you go, aha, okay. Well, this is kind of the aha for me. I think this game has a little bit more under the hood for Georgia Tech than others would think. Yep. Here's the other part. They've got a couple of games before they get to their last bye. Their last bye is November the 8th. I think this is a critical stretch for Georgia Tech. Everybody can, we're already, like last night I was watching the college football top 25 show, right? And they were already talking about like the Georgia game and the percentage to go to the ACC championship.
Yep.
And you know that from a year ago. That can wear on you a little bit. Brent Key's got a veteran team. If you look at their roster, they've got transfer kids, but they've also got a lot of older guys, 20-some-odd seniors, I think. When you start to look at them on paper, their focus and attention to detail week to week is probably going to be the biggest critical piece of their success. I think that pays off against Syracuse. Now, look, you may be right about the game, but I think at the end of the day, Syracuse is getting their full attention. And that's the part that is interesting to me because they found a way Saturday, right? They kind of found a way in the Duke game. King made plays. Omar Daniels' fumble recovery is a bizarre play. But the idea that they closed the game like they did is encouraging to Georgia Tech. I thought they were okay defensively. I was really concerned for Georgia Tech where they were defensively. But I still think Duke's really good. I think Georgia Tech's good. I think Virginia and SMU are good. I think Miami's good. I think those are the five we're going to be solved with here at the end. It's going to be interesting to see how the Jackets handle this on Saturday. But Fran Brown off a bye. Who knows who's playing? We saw Justice Ross Simmons go to the bench in Dallas. He has not been back since, right?
Yep.
It's going to be really interesting to see. Now, Stanford, I just don't think the west to east stuff has gone very well.
No.
Only one time has Cal won. Only one time has Stanford won going west to east in the 2 years they've been in the league. In fact, now this year, the east to west isn't going very well, except for Duke. Yeah. It's crazy. So, we'll see what happens. But I think Miami gets back on track this week. And I think that Miami-Florida State game in a couple of weeks is a really interesting game.
The Miami-SMU one in a couple weeks?
Miami-Florida State. I think Miami-Florida State Florida State and Clemson, right? They play.
Yes.
I think in a couple of weeks. That game's really interesting. Miami-SMU for you on November the 1st is all gas, no brakes.
Yeah.
The whole day.
We'll miss you that day. I know you.
You won't see me that day. I'm sorry. The Mustang folks who might have grown an affinity of somewhat to my work you're not going to see me that day. You'll see somebody up the food chain.
Well, Wes, we hope to see you again soon on the show. Thanks so much for stopping by this morning, having some coffee with us. We appreciate it.
Billy, good luck with this. I'm excited for you and great to see you as always.
Thanks, Wes. Have a good one.
All right.
There he goes. Wes Durham kicking off his day with us on All Access AM. And speaking of kicking off their day, we go back out to the East Coast and on 3 Sports' Stephen Wagner joining us covering Miami. Stephen, thanks for the time this morning. How are you?
Hey, Billy, I'm doing all right. Just real quick, I'm not sure if I'm able to hear you, and that might be an issue with me. Let me take my AirPods out real quick.
Okay, cool. Steven is covering Miami for us on Kane Sport. You can find his work on
Oh, still
canesport.com.
not able to hear you. Not totally certain what the issue is there. I don't know if that's on my end or not.
I'll talk for a couple seconds while Steven maybe works things out, and I'll drop him a text. But this Miami team and what they're getting together this week, playing this Stanford team that is certainly on a little bit of a high, beating Florida State, one of those other Florida programs there. But when you look at what this Miami team has been able to do this season, I think they're going to bounce back and try to figure things out this week. I don't think it's going to be a close game. Stanford did a really nice job against SMU a couple weeks ago, making a little bit of a trek, not all the way out to the East Coast, but they were able to put together a competitive game. It was 17-7 at half. They weren't necessarily in any position as far as winning the game, but they made it competitive and kind of made SMU earn every yard. I think one thing for me, the Miami offense, having some of those pro style type of capabilities is something that is worth watching, and that's something that we'll keep a close eye on there, just because the Stanford defense is pretty stout up front, being able to stop the run and things like that. And of course, Miami's run game kind of disappeared against Louisville with that front. And we have Stephen Wagner now to kind of break down more of that. The perks of live on-air stuff in the morning. Stephen, thanks for the time. How are things over there in Coral Gables as Miami looks to bounce back this week?
Vibes are definitely, I would say, better than they've been in years past. Normally, I think that there's usually kind of a little bit of panic of, oh, this is the Mario Cristobal law. It's kind of consistent. This is kind of how, Miami and Mario Cristobal lose games. And this is even how Cristobal lost some games at Oregon. But I really think that there's a little bit more confidence that with this roster and this team and the way that this team has been built, that they will find a way to kind of get their groove back and get their rhythm back this week against Stanford. It's certainly a game that Miami should win and should win pretty handily. Miami built this team from front to back. They built it on offensive line, defensive line, and sure tackling. All of those are things that they hope are going to be able to travel from week to week. For whatever reason, the offensive line and the run game simply did not get going last week against Louisville. But I still think that there's quite a bit of optimism that, this team is going to be okay. You look at the rest of the schedule for Miami. Certainly, Miami should be favored in every game that they're going to play the remainder of the year. And, that includes your Mustangs.
That's right. Hopefully, we'll get to see some of your crew out here in Dallas as they'll make the trip. I'm sure Miami fans, look, one loss, hopefully that doesn't deter you like it did deter some Florida State fans. I know Miami fans, I feel like, will fit right in Dallas over here November 1st, and that'll be quite the party. Two programs that are very similar as far as the type of schools they are. Some of the football tradition, Miami's got a little bit more recent football tradition as of late, and of course being in the big city. Let's bring everybody together. Let's make this, the next time they look at the permanent rivals, let's make this a permanent rivalry, Dallas to Miami. So Miami does get back into the action with Carson Beck coming off of 4 interceptions. I mean, some of them were kind of inexplicable. I know there's been a lot made about the last one where I could see, what maybe Carson was talking about. It looked like a wheel route that should have been a flat route as far as how it was thrown. But Carson Beck had his worst outing as a Cane and really, throughout his college career, you could argue. What is his mindset? What is kind of the early sense of how he took the loss and how he can try to right the ship?
Yeah, Carson definitely took a pretty decent amount of flack this week, especially for his response, which you just referenced. A lot of people interpreted that as he took Elijah Lofton, the tight end that he was supposed to that he threw the ball to, and he pretty much threw him off the bus. And for a lot of people, this brought back up the concerns of oh, this is what we were talking about at Georgia. Whenever we were mentioning leadership issues and how people can rally around you in the locker room. How's this being a good teammate if you just, threw someone under the bus? But I think there's still a lot of optimism that things are going to kind of get right this week. I kind of view Stanford as a little bit of a get right game for Miami. Team from the West Coast traveling all the way to South Florida. We've seen over the last year, both in the Big Ten and in the ACC, that traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast and from the East Coast to the West Coast, that definitely has a little bit of effect on teams and the way they're able to perform. At the end of the day, these are college kids who have classes on Thursdays and Friday. But I do think that Beck is probably going to have a good response, but kind of the question that I think a lot of Miami fans are asking right now is, man, are we going to get the 2023 Carson Beck that we saw at Georgia, who was really freaking good, took Georgia to the SEC championship game where they lost to Alabama, had, I think, like a 13-1 season is what that ended up being, and, beat the brakes off of FSU in the Orange Bowl? Or is this going to be like 2024 Carson Beck, who was projected to be a first-round draft pick, and then things just went sideways, and it seemed like he was never really able to find a rhythm? The first half of the season, we absolutely saw 2023 Carson Beck. It seemed like, the change of scenery, the change of environment, the new players, the new system around him, it seemed like that really kind of rejuvenated him. Now I think this is going to be a game where we get quite a few questions answered as far as the type of Carson Beck that we're going to see, because certainly the Louisville game was not his best outing by far.
Yeah, and for Miami, I mean, I've been kind of disappointed with the run game. I just think with the talent on the offensive line and what they have there, it was kind of an issue last year a little bit at times, but it's really kind of reared its ugly head, I think, this year for Miami. Are there any conversations internally about how to get this offensive line rolling, some confidence, giving them more onus on the run game there?
Yeah, well, Mario Cristobal, there is always going to be a very, very heavy emphasis on the running game. I mean, what Mario Cristobal wants to do, at his heart, is he wants to just dominate you up front. He wants to understand, or he wants you to understand that it doesn't matter how many defenders you put in the box. It doesn't matter how you're going to line up. It doesn't matter, what you are going to do defensively. Mario Cristobal wants to send a message and punish you and just push forward with the offensive line. So far this year, I wouldn't actually say that the run game had been an issue. It really only showed up in the Louisville game. I think at one point they had 22 carries for 46 yards. The final stat line escapes me, but that was definitely a really, really strong issue and kind of a concern, considering that it's not something that we'd seen, at really any point this year. Normally, the offensive line is able to effectively, do whatever it needs to do. And this was a line that, at the start of the year, it really did look like the best offensive line in football. I thought there was a very, very good argument this was the best O-line. And they've invested a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of recruiting, and they've used the portal very, very smartly to supplement this offensive line. So I think this week, it's going to be a question of, well, okay, do we correct whatever it was last week? Because quite frankly, I have no idea what it was last week that just reared its ugly head. Because, like I said, offensive line is kind of one of those things that you expect to travel. You expect your offensive line, which is built on strength and physicality, you expect that strength and physicality to go up every week. It's not like, we're leaning on timing and we're leaning on finesse and we're leaving and we're leaning on communication. This is supposed to be strength and technique on strength and technique. And for whatever reason, it just did not show up last week at all. I do think that they should be able to run the ball pretty effectively against Stanford. I do think that there is a little bit of stubbornness from Miami in kind of the way that they want to do things. Miami wants to win kind of by punching you up front in the run game. A gap, B gap runs, maybe a little C gap here and there, but you'll notice they don't really run to the perimeter very often. And it kind of felt like Louisville was pretty much saying, okay, keep trying to beat us up front. We are just going to overly commit resources to trying to stop you up front. And, maybe it was a preparation thing. Maybe it was, maybe it really was as simple as, Miami wasn't ready for the game. Honestly, man, this really is kind of one of those games that sort of escaped me whenever you're trying to look at, well, what exactly happened? What was the reason for this? Yes, Carson Beck threw 4 picks, but why is that? Because Miami absolutely had a superior roster. They absolutely had an offensive line that should have been able to handle a Louisville defensive line that I think is good, but I wouldn't say it's the best defensive front that Miami's faced this year, considering that they've already played Notre Dame and Florida and really ran the ball very effectively against both of those teams. So, if you want to scratch it up as, kind of a weird, inexplicable loss that it seems like, kind of always seems to creep up on Miami. In 2023, it was the Georgia Tech game where, very famously, Miami didn't take a knee at the end of the game. That was kind of the inexplicable loss. Last season, it was probably the Syracuse game where they had a 21-point lead on the road, final game of the season. It ended up blowing that lead. Maybe this year it's going to be the Louisville game where we look back a year from now and say, yeah, Carson Beck threw 4 picks. But I think the really, really important thing now is Miami making sure that this thing doesn't spiral.
The margin for error is so slim in this massive conference and the way the schedules have played out for Virginia, for Georgia Tech. Obviously, Miami will get their shot against SMU next week. They get Stanford this weekend, getting a chance to face a team that really hasn't shown too much. They've got a long road trip ahead of them as well to get out to Coral Gables. What does Miami have to do to make it to the ACC championship? Is it as simple as just stay focused? Is it certain things that they can improve fundamentally right now to kind of put them back in that driver's seat as long as they play their game that they had been playing earlier this year?
I think part of it is a little bit of a focus thing, because if you look at what's happened in Miami the last 2 years, there's always been one loss that's kind of caused things to spiral a little bit. A couple of years ago, it was Georgia Tech and failing to take a knee. I think they were 4-0 or 5-0 at that point, and then the wheels kind of came off and they finished the year 7-6. Last year, it also happened to be at Georgia Tech, where Miami's defense did not play very well at all. Georgia Tech did a lot of things to kind of control the ball and give Miami fits and keep the ball out of Cam Ward's hands, and they ended up losing. Now that I think about it, they ended up losing 3 out of their last 4 because they lost the bowl game as well. They lost to Georgia Tech, then they lost to Syracuse, and then they ended up losing to Iowa State. This year, there's absolutely a possibility that Miami could end up losing, could end up going on a little bit of a stretch where they lose 2 out of 3 games. It's absolutely possible that Miami loses to Louisville, they beat Stanford, and then they lose to SMU in Dallas. That's absolutely a thing that's very definitely on the table. So for Miami, it's about making sure that this thing does not spiral. And quite frankly, I think that this is going to be kind of one of those moments where leadership really needs to step up, where leadership, makes sure that the players understand, hey, we can, that the world isn't over, but we have to stay focused. We cannot let this thing spiral. And what specifically that looks like, I'm really not sure, because some of these Miami teams, heck, even some of basketball's Oregon teams. You remember that 2021 team that went to Columbus and beat Ohio State at the start of the year. By the end of the year, they were playing very, very tight. It looked like they weren't playing fast or having fun or just kind of being football players, it looked like they were playing more not to lose as opposed to playing to win. I think there's definitely got to be a little bit of concern from a fan standpoint that could happen this year. So I think for Miami, this is kind of one of those moments where leadership is probably going to be one of those things that you really need to lean on. And from a player standpoint, it's probably going to be one of those things that you need to lean on. Keep your players fresh, keep your players loose, and remind them that, hey, at the end of the day, football's fun. Go out there and play fun. Be fast, be physical. Understand that you're going to make mistakes. There's going to be mistakes in a football game, but as long as we play better than they do, you'll be pretty optimistic in how the game's going to turn out.
Yeah, I think for me, watch that point you made about the kind of the having fun angle. Sometimes some of these teams with the expectations placed on them with NIL and rev share and all of these things, man, they kind of forget that they are still playing in college. That, and I know now in college there's class, there's this, there's that, there's money, there's all of these things floating around, and you do have other focuses outside of football, so it is hard to stay focused. But college football is a blast, man. The scene down at Hard Rock Stadium this year for so many of these games have just been awesome. And it's a shame that Friday night they couldn't put it together and kind of keep things rolling. I think it's good for the ACC that Miami would have stayed undefeated. It would have given them a team right at the 1 or 2 spot, and you could kind of ride that all the way to the end. A lot of people thought it was going to be Clemson this year and Miami was going to be in that mix, but for Miami, to lose, maybe this is that galvanizing moment, but they need to just kind of have fun. It just seems like a team that, like you said, could end up being tight. But if they do kind of find that fun again and get right this weekend against Stanford, that'll kind of potentially catapult them. They'll face a big test against SMU on the road November 1st, of course. So that'll be a big one. They'll have to stay focused against Stanford, though. Let's leave you with this. Who are your current ACC championship projected participants? Do you see Georgia Tech and the Hoos, just kind of riding out the nice schedule that they have and ending up there, or does SMU stay unbeaten? Do they find a way against Miami next week and keep things rolling? What's kind of your take on the whole scene?
I still think Miami is going to end up getting to the ACC championship game, just because whenever you look at how Miami is built, this is the most talented roster in the ACC. Now, of course, that doesn't always beautifully translate to wins on the field. We've seen over and over and over again in college football, just because you have a loaded roster does not mean that you are going to win football games. But I still do believe that this is going to be kind of Miami's breakthrough season, where they get to the ACC championship game and they get to the college football playoff. As for who they're going to face, man, I got to tell you, I'm a believer in Georgia Tech. I'm a real believer in what Brent Key has going over there. I think they are a really good football team. I think they are consistently finding ways to win. And more importantly, I think they're giant killers. And I think that if they ended up getting to the ACC championship game and they play a team like Miami, where say they're going to be underdogs, I definitely think that they're going to have a really real chance to absolutely slay the dragon. I think that SMU is absolutely going to have a good chance. I'm not a huge believer in Virginia. I think that they're going to have a slip up at some point. I kind of felt like, at the start of the year, whenever Virginia lost to NC State, that was kind of more of along the lines of the Virginia that I was sort of expecting to see. Obviously, they're playing really good football right now, but I think they're going to have to slip up at some point. But as far as, what I'm projecting, Miami playing Georgia Tech in the ACC championship game, I mean, heck, if SMU beats Miami in Dallas, that could just as easily be the Mustangs. So I think that is going to shape up to be a massive game with some really big implications for the conference, and obviously to get to the playoff too, because both teams are going to be searching for that automatic berth. Especially if that loss or one loss or two losses end up causing Miami to be on the outside looking in.
Yeah, it is going to be fascinating to watch this play out. We just hope that we don't have to get down to the coin toss for this one. That would be so brutal for the league, but it's going to be really interesting to follow. I think there's a path, obviously, to getting 2 teams into the college football playoff, which is probably the most important thing. It could involve Miami losing to SMU in a couple weeks and kind of falling out of the championship picture, and Miami, not making the college football playoff, and then it's SMU and maybe a Georgia Tech. But however it happens, they've got to get 2 in, just like last year, and then kind of all will be right in the world. But Miami is going to have something to say about it. I would probably say that Miami finds a way in. I still think they're a team that's really, really talented. I am not ready to give up on them just yet. I think for me, the talent level that they have in the defensive line and the wide receiver position is just a problem for teams down the stretch. But SMU is going to have a big say in that in 2 weeks, though. If Miami comes out and loses that one, that is going to be curtains for their ACC championship hopes. And SMU is kind of in an interesting spot right now. We learned a lot this weekend against Clemson and how they played that game overall, but still quite the task to take down Miami when they're at their best. So we'll see what happens when those two teams face off and how their rest of their seasons go. Stephen Wagner of On3, Canesport.com. Thanks so much for stopping by this morning.
Yeah, appreciate you, Billy.
There you go. Stephen Wagner hanging out with us this morning, having some coffee and, hanging out on All Access AM. We appreciate him. Appreciate you guys listening. Make sure you guys check out Roback, RHOBACK.com. Get 20% off your first order with code PONY20. I'll get us an ACC code, but PONY20 is where you can get all your Roback gear on that first order. It's great. Selection, brand, all of that. Check out the pants too. I just got a pair of the pants and they breathe, and the quarter zips, with it being quarter zip season here very soon, are great as well. So appreciate Roback as well for always supporting us. Let's go to a little coaching search conversation here. Virginia Tech is quietly going about their search. Not one that you hear a lot about. That could be a good thing. That could be a bad thing. When you look at Virginia Tech and what they've needed to do to really rebrand their program as a whole, they've talked about spending more money. They've talked about improving the athletics budget. They've got Bruce Arians helping run that coaching search, which I think is a big deal. For me, if I'm Virginia Tech, I don't know if Bruce Arians would want to do this, but you want to have that man around your program as much as possible. And he's very involved in this hiring cycle, being on the search committee that Virginia Tech has formed for this search. According to On3's Pete Nakos, James Franklin is a good name to keep an eye on in this search. I think Franklin would be a great fit here. I do think he's going to be somebody that many schools are going to look at. It wouldn't shock me, truthfully, if a team like Florida State, if they opted to get rid of Mike Norvell, maybe that's somewhere they look. Because the thing with Florida State, when you look at that job, and we kind of talked about it in the opening, so I don't want to get completely back on it, but they have a very high set of expectations. And yes, that involves competing for a national championship. That is something that James Franklin kind of inexplicably at times did not do at Penn State, with some of the losses that his teams suffered, particularly, the Oregon loss, not being able to win the big game. At Florida State, the path to a national championship and the college football playoff is easier. Don't get that wrong. That's a very important piece here when you're evaluating a hire. A guy like James Franklin could come in, stabilize the program, win a bunch of games, and you could see that trajectory getting back on path to where Florida State wants it. Now, Virginia Tech is kind of up a little bit more so in that region that James Franklin has certainly played in a little bit. He's familiar with, obviously, Pennsylvania. That's, a little bit more northeast. But Virginia Tech is kind of that blue-collar type of a program, similar to a Penn State. And that's, I think, James Franklin not being in a pressure cooker of sorts might be a good thing. He's thrived at Vanderbilt when expectations were low. Of course, he's won a bunch of games at Penn State after turning that program around, but eventually the pressure and the expectations that were there got out of whack. And I think if I'm James Franklin, I'm looking at that Virginia Tech job. And if you're hearing the right things, and good for James Franklin, he can sit back and see exactly how things unfold when it comes to that job and whether or not it is going to be one that people really can kind of gravitate towards or not. Obviously, it's a great fan base. It's a great stadium experience. All of those things. Blacksburg is kind of a hidden gem, I think, that doesn't get talked about enough. And you do have a decent recruiting base there in Virginia, and you can kind of work up and down the East Coast and some of his other areas kind of up in that neck of the woods. So for me, if I'm James Franklin and you're collecting all that Penn State money, boy, what a marriage that would be for Virginia Tech if they were able to get James Franklin. I think that would be a great hire. I think it would set the bar high as far as what they want to accomplish, but he would also be given time to rebuild that thing because they need a coach in that role that is going to take his time building it. That's something that James Franklin is very much experienced with, and I think he'd be a great hire. Another name mentioned by our own Pete Nakos just yesterday is Bob Chesney at James Madison. He's only been there two years. He's 15-5. You're looking for that next Curt Cignetti. Everybody is doing that in this world of some of these coaching searches. They're at least going to kick the tires on some of these coaches that are at a lower level of football. He's a young, energetic coach that I think could really be, someone that maybe takes that job and ends up being the right fit. But I still circle James Franklin as one to keep an eye on. So also intriguing, Stanford. They've had a ton of time, of course, to look at that job and kind of the options out there. And I think, getting a chance to actually spend some time around Andrew Luck earlier this month, you really get a sense that he's turning over every stone. He's looking at all the options, and there are plenty of people that are involved in that search, and they're looking at that job, and they know it's kind of a long build, and it is a program that is trying to find its footing as a whole in this new world of college athletics. Not as good as well off as Virginia Tech is by any means, but Virginia Tech is still finding that footing after really not investing like they should have in college football and kind of going all in like some of these other universities have. For Stanford, they're now starting from scratch. They got the $50 million donation earlier this month. They are working through their season. They got kind of a signature win, I think, for the Frank Reich interim era to beat Florida State, no matter how down Florida State is. To do that, to do it at home, very important there. So you can kind of see some of those things from a culture perspective taking over. This job, I have no idea who could get this job. I am really intrigued about the structure of it. Pete Nakos at On3 did drop a bunch of names involved in this job, and some of them, you could, like one, for example, Pat Fitzgerald, former Northwestern coach. That would be an interesting one. He's coached at a high academic. He's had some levels of success that I think Stanford would be pleased with. But you also have a group of coaches in there that come from the NFL or come from this background, come from that background. And it makes it hard to predict, obviously, or project who's going to get that job. I think for Andrew Luck, he needs to have a hire in place probably in that mid-November range. If you're looking at it from a roster building perspective, when you talk about having some of the NFL coaches involved, that does throw a wrench in it. So I'd be intrigued to see kind of how that is navigated, if that's the path they ultimately go with, or are they going to take just a little bit more time and say, okay, we want so-and-so from the NFL. Let's go get him. We've got to wait. Andrew Luck is going to work with some of the staff or some of the recruiting department to put together the portal class or do this or do that. Stanford is going to let Andrew Luck do his thing there. This is his world. This is his football program. And he's going to be somebody who takes every single waking second to make sure it's right. And that's where I think you have to watch Stanford through a different lens. Yes, they've had the most time out of anyone to make this type of a hire, but they also have a different set of expectations, and they'd have a different plan in place for what they'd like to do as far as building their program and how they want to do it and the time requirements that they have as far as seeing some of these things. I don't think Stanford's in a position where, I don't want to say they're not worried about, okay, December 3rd, early signing period, transfer portal, January 2nd or whatever it is. We've got to have our guy. We got to have our staff, all of those things. They know that this hire is very important, and they're going to give this hire a long leash because there's nothing out there at Stanford right now that really gives anybody a lot of confidence in this job being one that is anything but a coach killer. They are building it the right way. They are putting the resources in from what it seems like. They're going to find their coach. I don't know who it's going to be, but they're going to do this in a very deliberate and I don't want to say slow, but they're going to take a really deliberate route to get there and then let the process play out and let the culture setting begin and let the talent acquisition begin. So Stanford, you have to look at it not only because it's a high academic and it's a really difficult place to kind of win right now, but you have to look at how they're doing it from a very different lens rather than a Virginia Tech or if a Florida State comes open and things like that. So very intriguing stuff out there on the farm, but they got a signature win this past week against Stanford. So with that, hope you guys enjoyed this edition of All Access AM. Again, reach out to our friends at OPW Solutions if you're in the North Texas area, if you're in Oklahoma, if you're in Arkansas, and contact them as well. They are expanding their reach in 2026, so they're excited about that. Plenty of offerings in the commercial landscaping, pressure washing, snow and ice control, fence, concrete repair world that they can help your business with. So reach out to them, 214-444-2305 today, and support our friends at OPW Solutions. We appreciate their support of All Access AM. We'll see you guys Thursday morning. We'll have some more guests on, and we'll preview the rest of Week 9. We'll throw out some game picks as ACC football this weekend approaches with the Friday night matchup once again. We'll see if they're as good as last week's, but hope you guys enjoyed this edition of All Access AM, and we'll catch you guys next time.